These are 5 of the most handsome leading men from the golden age of Hollywood, and every single one of them is still alive today. Between the ages of 86 and 96, these men outlived nearly every icon from that era, and their stories deserve to be told. The golden age stretched from the 1930s through the early 1960s, a time built on studio contracts, matinee idols, and faces that sold every magazine in America. Almost all of those faces belong to history now. Robert Redford passed away in September of 2025, Sidney Poitier in January of 2022, and Sean Connery, Paul Newman, Gregory Peck, Cary Grant, and Rock Hudson left us long before that. Only a small handful of those leading men are still with us, and we're starting with the oldest. Robert Wagner celebrated his 96th birthday on February 10th, 2026. 20th Century Fox signed him in 1950 as a teenage contract player, handpicked by studio chief Darryl F. Zanuck to become the studio's next romantic lead. All through the 50s, the studio marketed him right alongside Tony Curtis and Rock Hudson as one of Hollywood's top heartthrobs. The films from those years read like a tour through the golden age itself, starting with Titanic in 1953 opposite Barbara Stanwyck and Clifton Webb. Then Prince Valiant in '54, A Kiss Before Dying in '56, and The Pink Panther in '63, alongside Peter Sellers and David Niven. What most people never knew at the time is that behind the scenes, Wagner carried on a secret 4-year romance with Barbara Stanwyck. 22 years old and in love with a woman twice his age, a woman of 45, and it all started on the set of Titanic. Decades later, in his 2008 memoir, Pieces of My Heart, Wagner put it simply, "Barbara was the first woman I ever loved." 2 marriages to Natalie Wood shaped the rest of his personal story, the first in 1957 and the second in 1972. Her drowning on November 29, 1981, remains one of Hollywood's most enduring tragedies. The case reopened in 2011, and Wagner became a person of interest, but no charges ever came, and he has consistently denied wrongdoing. At 96, Wagner lives quietly and shares Hollywood memories with over 116,000 followers on his official Instagram account, proof that even in the age of social media, old Hollywood still draws a crowd. Clint Eastwood turns 96 on May 31st, 2026, and the fact that he's alive at all is a story in itself. Back in 1951, a 21-year-old Eastwood sat in the back of a Douglas AD bomber that ran out of fuel and plunged into the Pacific Ocean near Point Reyes, California. Both he and the pilot survived by swimming roughly 2 miles to shore. That alone would be enough for most lifetimes. But for Eastwood, the career hadn't even started. 8 years after that crash, CBS cast him as Rowdy Yates in the hit Western Rawhide, which premiered on January 9, 1959. Within 3 weeks, the show cracked the top 20 in TV ratings and eventually peaked at number 6 in the Nielsen's. Production ran about $40,000 per episode, high for the era, and Eastwood's starting pay came to $700 per episode. The network pushed his image hard. TV Guide ran a feature in August of '59 showing the 6'4" actor doing push-ups and offering fitness advice, and the studio press materials described him as a young actor with great hair, positioning him as CBS's answer to the heartthrobs on competing networks. Everything shifted when Sergio Leone cast him as the man with no name in A Fistful of Dollars in 1964. For a few dollars more, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly followed right after. And that squint, that lean frame, that serape became the visual shorthand of 1960s screen masculinity. 4 competitive Academy Awards, 4 Golden Globes, the AFI Life Achievement Award, and France's Legion of Honor accumulated over the decades that followed. Juror number 2, released in late 2024, marked his 40th film as director, completed at the age of 94. Reports from April 2026 place him between his California coast home and Hawaii, and one story claimed he'd stepped away from filmmaking for good. Eastwood himself called a nearly identical retirement story entirely phony just a year earlier, which tells you everything about the man. A quote widely attributed to him sums it up best: "Why stop? You die. That's why you stop." Michael Caine, born Maurice Joseph Micklewhite Jr., is 93 years old. Before any of the fame, before the knighthood, or the billions in box office receipts, the money ran out entirely, and he slept on composer John Barry's floor in London with nothing to show for years of trying. Zulu changed that in 1964. The Ipcrest file followed in '65, where those thick black-framed glasses became one of the most copied looks of the decade. And then came Alfie in 1966, the film that turned a working-class kid from South London into an international star. 5 Academy Award nominations landed that year, including Best Actor for Caine, along with the Special Jury Prize at Cannes, and the film reportedly pulled in approximately $15 million in the United States alone. Caine described the transformation in his own words: "Every bourgeois nightmare, a cockney with intelligence, and $1 million." 2 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor came later, one for Hannah and Her Sisters in '86, and another for The Cider House Rules in '99. Queen Elizabeth II knighted him in the year 2000, and his career box office gross now exceeds $7.5 billion worldwide. Even the name carries a good story. During a phone call with his agent, Caine needed a stage name on the spot and grabbed it from a marquee across the street advertising the Caine Mutiny, and that was that. October of 2023 brought what sounded like the final chapter, when the 90-year-old announced retirement on BBC Radio 4 with characteristic humor. "The only parts I'm likely to get now are old men, 90 men, maybe 85. And I thought, well, I might as well leave with all this. I've got wonderful reviews. What have I got to do to beat this?" That retirement lasted about 2 years. Variety and Deadline reported in September 2025 that Caine signed with Lionsgate to reprise his role in The Last Witch Hunter 2. At 92, the man simply wasn't done. Warren Beatty turned 89 on March 30th, 2026, carrying 14 Academy Award nominations across 4 categories behind him. No one else in Oscar history has been nominated as actor, director, writer, and producer for the same film twice. But Beatty pulled it off with Heaven Can Wait in '78 and again with Reds in '81. All of it traces back to 1961, when director Elia Kazan cast an unknown 24-year-old opposite Natalie Wood in Splendor in the Grass. Overnight, Beatty became a star, and Kazan later described what he saw in that first meeting. "Warren, it was obvious the first time I saw him, wanted it all, and wanted it his way, with complete confidence in his sexual powers, confidence so great that he never had to advertise himself, even by hints." 6 years after that debut, Beatty produced and starred in Bonnie and Clyde, a film assembled for $2.5 million that earned over $70 million worldwide. 10 Academy Award nominations followed, and the film effectively brought down what remained of the old production code. Beatty's profit participation netted him over $6 million personally, a fortune in 1968. The personal life grew into its own kind of legend. Joan Collins, Natalie Wood, Julie Christie, Diane Keaton, Madonna, the list of relationships reads like a Hollywood encyclopedia. One biographer controversially placed the number of romantic partners at 12,775, a figure Beatty never confirmed, and one that most people consider wildly exaggerated. Annette Bening changed everything. They married on March 12, 1992, after meeting on the set of Bugsy, and Beatty once described the moment with a line only he could deliver. "When I met Annette over lunch for Bugsy, I felt immediately that this was going to change my life. I remember losing interest in the garlic chicken I was eating within 20 seconds, and the garlic chicken had been very good. His last on-screen appearance came as Howard Hughes in Rules Don't Apply in 2016, and no public sighting has been confirmed since 2022. At 89, Beatty remains one of Hollywood's most private figures, and without question, one of its most fascinating. George Hamilton closes out this list at 86 years old, and he might be the most self-aware man in Hollywood history. MGM signed him as one of their last contract players, right at the tail end of the studio system. Crime and Punishment. USA in 1959 earned him the 1960 Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer, and the studio immediately loaded his schedule with Home from the Hill, Where the Boys Are in 60, and Light in the Piazza in 62, opposite Olivia de Havilland. Burt Reynolds captured his appeal better than anyone. When I came to Hollywood, there were 175 Marlon Brandos, 2,000 Jimmy Deans, and a lot of Carol Bakers. But nobody wanted to be David Niven, except George. Debonair, impeccably dressed, and perpetually tanned, Hamilton occupied a lane that no one else in Hollywood even tried to enter. That tan became the defining detail of his entire career. Bo Derek wrote in her autobiography about an ongoing contest between her late husband John Derek and George Hamilton over who carried the deeper tan. Decades down the road, Hamilton leaned right into it by playing the extra crispy Colonel in KFC commercials, a deeply tanned parody of his own public image. 1966 brought a relationship with Linda Bird Johnson, the daughter of President Lyndon B. Johnson, and that caused a political storm when Hamilton received a draft deferral. 11 years later, in 1977, he stood among only a handful of celebrities invited to Elvis Presley's private funeral. Active on Cameo, present on Instagram, and still turning up at Hollywood events, Hamilton has outlasted nearly every leading man he ever shared a screen with. Robert Wagner at 96, Clint Eastwood at 95, Michael Caine at 93, Warren Beatty at 89, and George Hamilton at 86. 5 men whose faces defined what a leading man looked like in Hollywood's greatest era. The stars they worked beside are gone now, and the studio system that built them collapsed decades ago. These 5 are still here, living proof that the golden age of Hollywood hasn't ended entirely, not yet. If you enjoyed this look back at Hollywood's most iconic leading men, subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover the stories behind the golden age every week.